Earlier this month, George Perez died at the age of 67. Over the last 50 years, Perez was one of the most prolific, most popular, and most influential artists in the comics industry. His career began in the early 1970s with Marvel Comics. Within a few years, he was penciling some of the company's top titles, including Fantastic Four and The Avengers, where he worked alongside writer Steve Englehart, who viewers of my Best Batman Ever series will recall is one half of my favorite Batman creative team. Perez penciled the Avengers off and on for nearly 5 years, and as the 1970s gave way to the 80s, he got a couple of gigs for DC Comics, a pair of titles centered on two more superhero teams, you may have heard of them, the Teen Titans and the Justice League of America. His run on New Teen Titans alongside writer Marv Wolfman is considered definitive and established Wolfman and Perez as one of the foremost creative teams in comics during the 1980s. Perez also had a celebrated 5-year run on Wonder Woman as writer and penciler for the first 2 years, then as writer for the next 3. He continued to work at Marvel Comics as well as both writer and artist, returning for another run on the Avengers, working on the Silver Surfer monthly title, and penciling a little miniseries alongside writer Jim Starlin called The Infinity Gauntlet that over the years has proven to be somewhat important to the superhero genre. And in 2003, when the long-awaited crossover between Marvel's Avengers and DC's Justice League finally came to be, George Perez was, by universal assent, the only artist for the job. So all in all, a hell of a career. And in the midst of it, sprinkled amongst those legendary runs on the Avengers and the Justice League and the Teen Titans and Wonder Woman, George Perez, as writer and penciler, and sometimes both, helped to create some of the most iconic stories and images to ever feature the character of Superman. He'd drawn Superman during his Justice League of America run, but Perez's first notable Superman story apart from the Justice League came in 1983, with DC Comics Presents number 61. The story, written by Len Wein, with pencils provided by Perez and Pablo Marcos, with Marcos also inking alongside Rick Hoberg, is titled The Once and Future War, and is a team-up between Superman and OMAC, the One-Man Army Corps. OMAC, a creation of Jack Kirby, is basically a cop from the future who receives superpowers via transmission from a satellite. In this story, OMAC travels back in time to the present day in pursuit of a robot assassin dispatched by OMAC's arch-enemies at Intercorp. The robot assassin is called Murder Mech, a name I love because it destroys any and all plausible deniability the Intercorp scientists may have had. You can't really play innocent after your robot kills somebody when you've named it Murder Mech, can you? I admire villains who are willing to just own it like that. Murder Mech's mission is to travel back in time and kill, or murder if you will, one of OMAC's ancestors, which will prevent OMAC from ever being born and remove him as an obstacle to Intercorp. So, hang on. A killer robot from the future is sent back in time to eliminate an enemy by killing his ancestor. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I know Harlan Ellison sued James Cameron for ripping him off. Is it possible Cameron owes Len Wein some money too? If so, he should probably go ahead and send a check to Kevin Costner too while he's at it, because everybody knows Avatar is just Dances with Wolves. Give Costner his money, James. Anyway, Murder Mech, bless his heart, arrives in the present in the middle of a liquor store robbery. He smashes his way out of the liquor store and starts flipping cop cars, which attracts the attention of Superman. They have a brief confrontation, which ends with Murder Mech firing a bunch of missiles at Superman, knocking him back into an abandoned building. Then Murder Mech takes off, with the liquor store robbers following along, deciding to stick with the gigantic robot that just saved them from the police. And there are 4 robbers? Jesus, how many guys do you need to knock over a liquor store? OMAC arrives, and the cops, displaying a reactionary cluelessness sadly typical of people in their profession, immediately try to arrest him for taking part in the liquor store robbery. OMAC tosses the cops aside, but then Superman returns to the scene like, "This is the part at the beginning of the crossover where we fight." And so they fight. But pretty soon OMAC is like, "Actually, instead of punching each other, maybe we should be working together." And Superman says, "You should have thought of that before you started this fight." And OMAC says, "It wasn't me who started the fight. It was you." And Superman says, "Oh yeah, it was, wasn't it?" That's not even part of my breezy, intentionally half-assed paraphrase. Superman actually says that. So Superman and OMAC have a talk and get on the same page about Murder Mech. They find Murder Mech at a train station when it's about to take out one of OMAC's ancestors. Fortunately, Superman arrives in the nick of time and flies the intended victim to safety. While Superman slugs it out with Murder Mech, OMAC fights off the liquor store robbers who have been supplied with futuristic weapons by Murder Mech. Superman finally succeeds in putting down Murder Mech for good. OMAC takes down the liquor store robbers and returns to the future. And in a cute twist, it turns out the man Superman saved from Murder Mech isn't OMAC's ancestor, but just a random guy who got in the way. The intended target, OMAC's actual ancestor, was this janitor who was standing behind the guy Superman thought Murder Mech was aiming at. This is a fun story, and an excellent showcase for Perez, who, alongside co-penciler Pablo Marcos, shows off his facility for action scenes. Check out the velocity he's able to impart to Superman in this panel that shows him being thrown backwards by an attack from Murder Mech. The body language, the arms and legs thrown straight out, the cape blown forward over his head. Look at the righteous anger evoked in these panels from the next page when Superman rises from the rubble to confront OMAC, who he initially blames for the incident. Perez's Superman is strong, fast, agile, tough, and determined. My favorite panel in the story might be this one, a dramatic low-angle shot of Murder Mech lifting a train car while Superman squares off against him in the foreground, fists clenched, fearless, and ready for anything. Several years later, in 1989, Perez began a 9-issue run on Action Comics, penciling his first 3 issues, then handling page layouts for the rest and co-writing with Roger Stern. My favorite issue from this run is the second, Action Comics number 644, co-written by Perez and Stern, penciled by Perez, inked by Brett Breeding. In this story, titled Doppelganger, Superman is summoned to Smallville by Lana Lang to help her and the Kents deal with the erratic behavior of Matrix. For those of you who don't know, Matrix is a being made of protoplasm with the ability to shapeshift and other superpowers, who is originally from the Pocket Universe. If you don't know what the Pocket Universe is, I don't have time to explain. It's complicated. All you need to know is the Pocket Universe has an Earth that is a lot like the pre-crisis version of the mainline DC Universe, and the Lex Luthor of the Pocket Universe created Matrix, who eventually came to live in the main universe and even stayed with the Kents in Smallville for a while. Matrix eventually adopts the identity of Supergirl, but during the time frame when this story from Action Comics 644 takes place, Matrix has been living in Metropolis and secretly assuming the identity of Clark Kent, while the real Clark has been off-world doing Superman stuff. After Matrix is injured in an explosion involving the Eradicator, a Kryptonian artifact Superman acquired on his travels and brought back with him to Earth, Superman takes them to Smallville to recuperate. But when he arrives in Smallville at the start of Action Comics 644, something is wrong. Matrix has again taken the physical form of Superman, only he could use a shave and a change of clothes. But that's not all. Matrix seems to believe he actually is Superman. When the real Superman arrives on the scene, Matrix is just sitting down to a big pancake breakfast with a nervous Ma and Pa Kent. He announces that he's left Metropolis for good and will be staying here full-time to help out on the farm. But then he senses Superman's presence nearby and flies away to hide in a nearby abandoned quarry, taking Ma, Pa, and Lana along with him. When the real Superman tracks them down, Matrix is now wearing a darker version of his superhero costume. Matrix accuses Superman of being the imposter and attacks. During their fight, Superman figures out that Matrix must have somehow created a psychic link between their minds when he activated the Eradicator. That's why Matrix has Superman's memories and believes that he is Superman. Confused, angry, and finally filled with remorse over endangering the lives of the Kents and Lana, Matrix gives up the fight and vanishes. After a brief, melancholy parting visit to the Kents' farmhouse, Matrix leaves Earth, flying off into deep space and an uncertain future. Real Superman versus imposter Superman as a premise had already been long since beaten to death when this story was published in 1989, and yet Perez and Stern managed to breathe some life into it, mostly thanks to how sympathetic Matrix is. Lacking an identity of, at this point, his own, compromised by a Kryptonian artifact he doesn't understand, Matrix genuinely believes he is Superman. After spending his entire existence up to this point looking for a place to fit in, he thinks Smallville and the Kent family is where he belongs, not because of the relationships he's forged as Matrix, but because he believes he's someone else. And when the real Superman arrives and challenges that belief, Matrix reacts with violence, not just because he believes he's the real Superman, but because he wants to be. The memories he has now, thanks to the Eradicator, the sense of self, the purpose, the mission, the feeling of being Superman. It's all a sad delusion, false, but Matrix wants it to be true. We can see that in the face of Matrix thanks to the vivid and expressive art of George Perez. We can see the hope when he's trying to convince the Kents and Lana that they have nothing to worry about, that he'll protect them because he's Superman. We see the confusion, the rage that gives way to desperation as Matrix fights not only to defeat the real Superman, but to hold on to that delusion as it begins to slip irretrievably out of his grasp. There's a lot of great action in this issue, but it's through rendering those expressions of emotion that Perez really shines. It's not just the way he draws Matrix either. Perez's depiction of the genuine Superman is equally first-rate. Look at how Perez shows us Superman's compassion for Matrix in his body language from these panels following the end of their fight. Look how Superman snaps from weary to suddenly alert when he hears his mother's call for help. And look at this extraordinary panel after he flies to the rescue at the last second and shelters Lana and the Kents as a building collapses around them. Perez draws a very action-based Superman. His talent for imbuing his panels with movement, speed, and impact is second to none. Perez's Superman is one of the definitive takes on the character. He's well-proportioned, muscular but not too bulky, square-jawed but not overly cartooned, a face as capable of displaying kindness and empathy as it is of displaying anger, topped with that thick mop of black hair, complete with a curl dropping down across his forehead. Classic, iconic, impressive, but also human, approachable, reassuring. Besides the many issues of Superman comics for which Perez contributed interior art, he also drew some of the most striking Superman covers of the last 30 or so years, like this modern riff on Joe Shuster's classic Superman #1 cover for Action Comics number 643, or this trio of covers from Action Comics 647, 648, and 649, the 3 installments of the Brainiac trilogy. Or this one from Action Comics 650, which is reminiscent of the cover of Action Comics #1, only this time, instead of Superman lifting up a car while someone in the foreground runs away in confused terror, Superman is swooping in to get between a flying car and a person it's chasing. Same basic elements, different arrangement. For a more recent example, I'm fond of this variant cover Perez did for Superman number 714 in 2011, a looser interpretation of the Shuster cover Perez recreated for Action Comics 643. Only this time, the background is white instead of yellow, and there is minimal text, and rather than being enclosed within the scene of the city framed by the circle, Superman rises above it, unlimited, transcendent, as though he's flying up out of the page itself. Some of Perez's most celebrated Superman work isn't for a Superman story, but for a story where Superman plays an important part, along with nearly every other notable DC Comics character. I'm speaking of 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, which Perez co-created alongside his longtime partner on the Teen Titans, writer Marv Wolfman, with inks provided by Dick Giordano, Jerry Ordway, and Mike DiCarlo. An attempt to streamline the convoluted continuity of the DC Universe, Crisis on Infinite Earths is one of the most important comic series ever published. I'd like to say that it was the crossover to end all crossovers, but unfortunately, it had the opposite effect. In the more than 35 years since it was originally published, DC has revisited the Crisis numerous times, refining it, repeating it, undoing it, redoing it, engaging in the kind of compulsive fiddling with its fictional timeline that Crisis was originally intended to do away with for good. But however you feel about Crisis as a story, or the effect it had on the heroes of DC Comics and their fictional histories, one thing is difficult to deny, and that is the quality of the artwork of George Perez. In fact, the story of Crisis is so impenetrably convoluted at times that Perez's artwork is the only thing holding it together. Superman's role in that story is important, but he's only one of many prominently featured characters. He does come to the forefront of the story a few times, though, and in those times we are once again reminded of just how good George Perez is at drawing Superman. The most well-remembered of those times is probably Crisis on Infinite Earths number 7, the one with quite possibly the most iconic DC Comics cover of the 1980s, drawn by Perez. Kinda gives it away though, huh? Then again, maybe not. Fake-out covers have been a common gimmick for pretty much the entirety of the history of comics. You see Lois Lane holding Jimmy Olsen's severed head on the cover and she's screaming, "Superman decapitated Jimmy! But why?" And then you read the story, and it turns out it was all a misunderstanding. Jimmy is accidentally decapitated, and it only looks like Superman did it, but he's actually not responsible at all. Everything's fine. So, a distraught Superman holding an apparently dead Supergirl on the cover doesn't necessarily mean Supergirl dies in the story. A cover like this is the publisher's way of saying, might be what it looks like, might not. You'll have to buy the comic to find out because you can't trust us. In this case, however, it is exactly what it looks like from the cover. Supergirl dies fighting the Anti-Monitor, the main bad guy of the series. The Anti-Monitor is a being from an antimatter universe who wants to reboot the Big Bang to make antimatter more dominant than matter, an act that will destroy the entire multiverse. Beat that, Thanos! I'm just being rhetorical, that's not a challenge. Anyway, Supergirl doesn't defeat the Anti-Monitor, but she hurts him badly enough that he's forced to retreat. Before he leaves, the Anti-Monitor mortally wounds Supergirl, who has been fighting to protect an injured Superman. With the Anti-Monitor gone, surrounded by other heroes, including the Golden Age Superman from Earth 2, Superman cradles Supergirl in her dying moments. She tells him not to cry, that she knew what she was doing, being brave like he'd always taught her, and fighting to protect the world and the people she loved. She dies, and Superman is momentarily seized by a furious need for vengeance. He cries out that he'll kill the Anti-Monitor for this. But his other self, the Earth 2 Superman, calms him down, reminds him that the mission to save the multiverse has to come before his desire for revenge. And so Superman picks up Supergirl and returns with the others to Earth. Actually, to 5 Earths from different universes that have kind of half-merged together as a result of the time crisis. Like I said before, it's a lot. We see a bit of Supergirl's public funeral, then cut to Superman outside the Fortress of Solitude, alone with Supergirl's body that has been wrapped in a cape. He says a sad, private goodbye to his cousin, then takes her into his arms for a final time and flies off into space, which I suppose is the superhero version of being buried at sea. It's a quiet, still moment in the midst of an extremely dense and plot-heavy series. Crisis on Infinite Earths is not what I would call a great piece of writing. Marv Wolfman is one of the best ever, but the series is an extensive and, in my opinion, unnecessary exercise in continuity house-cleaning disguised as a story. It's telling, I think, that 37 years later, one of the few specific images anyone remembers from Crisis on Infinite Earths is this one. A sobbing Superman holding the body of his cousin, the Man of Steel, broken by grief and loss. The thing about Superman, as drawn by George Perez, is he's human. He's stronger than we are, faster, he can fly, he's nigh invulnerable physically, he doesn't bleed like we do usually, but he feels like we do. He loves, and when a loved one dies, it hits him just as hard as it would any of us. You can see it in his posture, in his face. You can see it also in the composition of panels like this one, where the death of Supergirl seems to have drained all of the color out of the universe. All of it but red, the color of anger and pain and love. That's the artist George Perez was. In the decades after Crisis and his run on Action Comics that ended in 1990, Perez would only work on Superman projects sporadically. He returned to the character in 2011 as the writer and cover artist of the monthly Superman title, which had been relaunched as part of the New 52, another reboot of DC's fictional timeline. Perez's run on Superman lasted only 6 issues before he left, citing creative conflicts and a lack of direction from editors, problems which were sadly common during the New 52 era. Unfortunately, that brief run was the last significant work George Perez ever did on Superman. He worked sporadically for the next several years, and then in 2019 he announced he was retiring from professional comics work, citing multiple health issues including heart problems, diabetes, and impaired vision. Late last year, he revealed that he had been diagnosed with inoperable pancreatic cancer and had chosen to forego treatment and let nature take its course. On May 6, 2022, George Perez died, leaving behind a legacy as rich and varied and important as any comics artist who ever lived. Not to be overlooked as a part of that legacy is Superman, who, as brought to life by Perez, is every bit as human as he is superhuman. As rendered by the hand of George Perez, the artist and the writer, Superman is bulletproof yet vulnerable, capable of soaring above the clouds while remaining firmly grounded. A hero, an icon, a savior, but also a son, a cousin, and a friend. I look at George Perez's Superman and I see all of the qualities that made me fall in love with the character in the first place. Everything I could ever want from Superman: depth, emotion, humanity, dimensions beyond the muscles and the superpowers. Qualities that you should expect to find when you're looking at the best Superman and one of the best Superman artists ever.